morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. Philippine banking assets near 27 trillion pesos in April, signaling steady growth for the sector. Half of Filipino families still consider themselves poor, according to a new survey. U.S. President Donald Trump deploys National Guard troops to break up protests against his immigration crackdown. And ahead, Apa Ongpin, the executive director of the Makati Business Club, joins us live on the push for a 200 peso minimum wage hike. Let's take a look at how global financial markets performed last Friday, with U.S. stocks rising on strong jobs data and hopes for a new U.S.-China trade deal. Wall Street closed higher as a better-than-expected jobs report eased recession fears, while Tesla rebounded from a sharp drop in the previous session. Traders also welcomed word that 3 of President Donald Trump's cabinet members will meet with Chinese officials in London today to discuss a possible trade agreement, a move that could ease global supply chain pressures.
2025's most expected bromance failure arrived perhaps a little ahead of schedule, but certainly not to the surprise of anyone. The president has had a difficult time keeping high-profile friends in the spotlight for a long time. I think the sudden reversal, though, of Elon Musk going from BFF to frenemy to now outright hostility was a bit jarring. Looking at Tesla stock, though, it seems investors are pretty excited to have Elon back at the helm, and that's probably for the better. If you're a U.S. taxpayer hoping that Doge was going to find lots of savings that could be reinvested, you were sadly mistaken, and unfortunately, those are unlikely to materialize. But the president, like most other things, will quickly move on from this and get back to the business of governing, we hope.
All 3 major U.S. indexes gained over 1%, with the Dow up 1.1%, the S&P 500 rising by 1%, and the Nasdaq climbing 1.2%. In Europe, markets were mixed. The FTSE 100 edged higher by 0.3%, the DAX slipped by 0.1%, and the CAC 40 higher by 0.2%. Here at home, total assets of Philippine banks climbed to record levels in April, riding on macro stability and stronger lending. Latest data from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas shows total banking assets reached nearly 27 trillion pesos, up 5.5% from 25.48 trillion in the same month last year. Universal and commercial banks continue to dominate the sector, accounting for 93.5% of total assets. Thrift and digital banks make up the remaining share, still small but growing as the industry evolves. Government debt payments plunge in the first quarter, reflecting lower maturities and interest expenses. The Bureau of Treasury reports total debt payments at 622.9 billion pesos from January to April, down 45.69% from 1.15 trillion pesos in the same period last year. Of that amount, 53.86% went to principal amortization, while 46.14% was allocated for interest payments. The decline could give the government more flexibility to fund programs. But fiscal watchers say debt service remains elevated due to pandemic-era borrowings. Now, the EDSA revamp hits a major roadblock, with President Marcos halting work until a new rerouting strategy is ready. In his weekly vlog, Marcos says he temporarily suspended the project due to its lengthy 2-year timeline and warned that local governments must be better prepared. Transportation Secretary Vince Dizon confirms that the president has ordered them to revamp the plan within a month after hearing concerns from Metro Manila residents. The EDSA rehabilitation covers the full reconstruction of its 23.8-kilometer northbound and southbound lanes, a high-stakes project with major implications for traffic, mobility, and economic flow across the capital. The Department of Agriculture is slashing the maximum suggested retail price of imported rice to 43 pesos per kilo starting July 1st. Agriculture Secretary Francisco T. Laurel says the adjustment follows a drop in global rice prices and a tariff cut from 35% to 15% to help cool food costs. The maximum SRP for imported rice was first set at 58 pesos per kilo and has been lowered in phases, reaching 45 by March. The latest price cap is part of the government's efforts to ease pressure on consumers as food inflation remains a top concern. House Speaker Martin Romualdez is backing a bill to make the 20 peso rice initiative permanent, while President Marcos has ordered the program to continue until the end of his term in 2028. But analysts say price controls without addressing supply chains and farm productivity may only offer short-term relief. The Energy Development Corporation, the country's leading geothermal producer, is pouring up to 30 billion pesos into drilling 40 new geothermal wells by 2026. The drilling campaign has already ramped up EDC's rig count from just 1 to 7 this year, marking a major push to scale up domestic renewable supply. The expansion will support 83 megawatts of new geothermal capacity plus 40 megawatt hours of battery storage to stabilize the grid. Projects underway include the Alayan, Manadog, Pinawan, and Bago binary plants, all designed to feed clean energy into Luzon and Visayas. EDC says that the investment is critical to help parent firm First Gen hit its goal of 13 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030, as the Philippines looks to cut our reliance on coal and reduce energy import costs. A new cargo lifeline opens in Samar as the Amanda Yehan port goes fully operational, helping ease pressure from the partial closure of the San Juanico Bridge. Located in Basi, Western Samar, the port now handles roll-on, roll-off, and light cargo vessels, following emergency upgrades by the DPWH to boost capacity and access. Over the weekend, Transport Secretary Vince Dizon inspected the site alongside officials from the Philippine Ports Authority, Marina Coast Guard, and DPWH. The port now features a 14-meter platform with ramp plus land reclamation, stabilization, and obstruction clearance. Secretary Dizon says that the port will serve as a crucial alternative hub for cargo movement, while the San Juanico Bridge, a key link between Samar and Leyte, undergoes emergency repairs. Motorists should brace for oil price hikes this week, with pump rates set to climb amid fresh global supply risks. Gasoline prices could go up by as much as 60 centavos per liter, diesel by nearly a peso, and kerosene by 25 to 40 centavos per liter. The Energy Department cites persistent geopolitical tensions plus supply disruptions in Canada linked to ongoing wildfires as key drivers of the expected increase. The adjustment follows a string of volatile price movements, keeping fuel costs as a major variable for Philippine inflation and transport expenses. We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's check on Asian markets this Monday morning as investors weigh global growth signals and regional inflation trends. Right now, the Nikkei 225 is higher by 1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index higher by 1.2%. Shanghai's Composite higher, not by as much, up by just 0.3%. And Singapore's Straits Times Index up by just 0.1%. Now, here at home, last week the PSE Index moved sideways to close at 63.77 as buying momentum waned despite cooler inflation. May inflation slowed to 1.3% from 1.4% in April and from 3.9% a year ago, driven by lower utility and transport costs. But even with price pressures easing, investor sentiment stayed cautious with a thin trading volume and a lack of fresh catalysts holding back gains. Now, in the near term, analysts expect the market to move sideways to lower within the 6,000 to 6,500 range as traders look for stronger signals on monetary policy and corporate earnings. Right now, taking a look at the PSE index as of 10:17 this morning, the main gauge is in the green, higher by 0.2% to 63.90. The broader all shares index is flat with a slight upward bias. Now, gains in the holding firms and services counters are offsetting the losses in the financials, industrial, property, and mining and oil counters. Mining and oil counter down sharply in early trade, down by nearly 3%. Now, volume is at 136 million shares, and value of those trades is at 891 million pesos. Market breadth is negative with 80 decliners, 54 advancers, and 46 stocks unchanged. At the currency market, the peso opens weaker at 55.85 to the greenback, depreciating from its previous close of 55.62. With inflation easing and the peso moving the way it is, we now turn to a new snapshot of household conditions across the country. 50% of Filipino families still consider themselves poor, but the latest survey points to improving consumer sentiment. That's according to the latest Social Weather Station's poll, showing a 5-point drop from mid-April. The figure translates to 14.1 million Filipino households identifying as poor, down from 15.5 million. Meanwhile, 42% now describe themselves as well off, the highest on record. Self-rated poverty is lowest in Metro Manila at 33% and highest in the Visayas at 67%. For policymakers and businesses, the shift may signal stronger domestic spending ahead, particularly among low to middle-income households. But the sharp regional divide also underscores the need for more inclusive growth as inequality persists across the country. Now, onto a major policy shift that could directly impact household income and reshape the cost structure for businesses nationwide. The House of Representatives has just approved a 200 peso across-the-board daily minimum wage hike for private sector workers, potentially the first legislated wage hike in 36 years since 1989. If signed into law, this would mean a mandatory pay increase for millions of workers, regardless of region, industry, or company size. Labor groups are celebrating the move, but the business sector is urging caution, warning of possible fallout on job creation, inflation, and investor confidence. Joining us now is Apa Ongpin. He's the Executive Director of the Makati Business Club. Hi, Apa. Good to have you on again.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about this wage hike that Congress just passed. Were you shocked by this development?
Frankly, no. We saw it coming to some extent. It's a populist move. Let's be totally frank about it. They did not consider the economic consequences of this thing. And there are regional wage boards. The Makati Business Club and many other business organizations, we are not opposed to wage hikes per se, okay? We see the arguments for them. So we're not saying no wage hikes ever, right? What we're saying is let the regional wage boards be the ones to make the hikes because they consider the economic consequences.
Mm-hmm. All right. Speaking of those hikes, the House passed 200 pesos, a 200 peso wage hike. Congress wants a 100 peso wage hike, so it's going to go to the bicameral committee. What do you think about the amounts that are being put forward?
As I said, and you said, a one-size-fits-all across-the-board wage hike is totally the wrong way to go. 200 pesos, okay, in Metro Manila, which has the highest minimum wage, represents a 37% increase. That's very, very steep. Most SMEs will not be able to afford that. So they're going to shed jobs if that happens, all right? And then, if you go to places like the Visayas and Mindanao, minimum wage is 400 pesos or so there, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a 50% increase.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, here in Metro Manila, it'll go from 645 to 845. But this is the main financial district. I mean, in Makati, people are already raising alarm bells over this.
Yes.
What happens in Calabarzon and Mindanao? What do you think the effects are going to be for the SMEs across the country, particularly in these areas?
Well, as I said, I think some SMEs are just going to shed jobs. They can't afford to pay people that much. Their margins aren't that great, right? And don't forget that this is going to cause inflation, right? This is, our official statement says we believe that there is a tendency for this to cause inflation, but that is basically spitting into the wind in terms of benefiting the workers. Yeah, you're going to give them more money, but if it's worth less, at the end, it cancels out.
Yeah, it's hard to, you have to educate them with a bigger picture. Speaking of inflation, with May inflation dropping to 1.3%,
yes,
people are saying, and in April was at 1.4%, people are saying that we have the headroom because inflation is so low. What would you say to this, to counter this?
Yeah, inflation is low now. I think the government should be credited with having done a great job, to fight inflation. Okay. Inflation was higher in previous years, and this is what this wage hike is seeking to compensate, right? For that period when, the inflation was over 6%, 7%, and these are, sure, there are places in this country where we do need a wage hike, all right? But across the board, 200 pesos, it's too much.
Okay. Talk to us about the timing of this bill. Economic growth is below expectations. HSBC pegs 2025 GDP at 5.6%. The World Bank expects it to come in at 5.3%, both short of the government's 6 to 8% target. Talk to us about the timing of this wage hike, if it even does materialize.
Well, it's not very good timing because, generally speaking, inflation, which will be a consequence of this thing, will decrease growth. I mean, in very, very broad terms, right? It's going to be a problem because, money is worth less. So even if the economy seems to grow in absolute terms, with inflation, it's actually not going to grow that fast.
Senator J.V. Ejercito is proposing a 150 peso wage hike as an alternative. What are your thoughts on this, Apa?
Again, we're opposed to any kind of across-the-board wage hike. We believe that if the wage hike is justified, it should be the regional wage boards that should do it. There is absolutely no reason for the Senate and the House of Representatives to usurp that function from the regional wage boards.
Why do you think they're doing this now, at this junction? Why do you think they're taking...
Pure
is
politics.
it all populist politics?
Yes.
Also, the Makabayan Bloc, a left-wing leading party list representatives, they praise House Speaker Martin Romualdez for fast-tracking this bill. What do you think about the bigger political dynamics at play with this wage hike bill?
Well, basically, they're trying to increase their popularity. That's all it is, right? The economic consequences, as we keep repeating, have not been properly considered. And, this kind of thing, they could have legislated that the regional wage boards should all now consider a wage hike. That's the proper way to do it. But this kind of thing where you blanket across the whole country everybody 200 pesos or even 150, that's nuts. Sorry. It's just not the way to run an economy.
And this, as we're trying to get foreign investments into the country, what message do you think this says to foreign investors that would like to do business in the country?
Well, right now, we're already at a disadvantage compared to places like Vietnam and Indonesia. Our minimum wage is already higher, you know, and in general, just our wages are higher than these guys. No? You're going to raise the wages even more? Well, you know, why would anyone invest here when they have to pay that much?
But labor groups are saying, you know, it's a moral obligation that wages need to go up. What would you like to say to them, those that are clamoring for this and saying it's a moral obligation for our lawmakers to push this forward?
It's more of a moral obligation for government to fight inflation. And this makes a mockery of fighting inflation, right? You know, when you fight inflation, you give people the money that they're earning, you give it more value, you know? And that is much, much better than giving them more money with less value. You know?
And apart from wage-driven inflation, what are the concerns of the Makati Business Club when it comes to an across-the-board 200 peso wage hike?
What are the
concerns? What are the biggest fears of the Makati Business Club? Apart from wage-driven inflation, that's a top concern. What else what else would be the economic implications of this?
Well, we're very concerned for the SME sector who can't afford this wage increase. And they're going to just shed jobs. In some cases, they might even shut down, you know, because they just can't afford this. And you know, it's not. I mean, it's not a good incentive for the economy. So, yeah, I mean, those are our concerns.
Okay, if you could say something to the president right now, what would you want to tell him about this issue?
I think the president understands this issue very well. This has nothing to do with the president. This is you know, Congress. But you know, I don't know if the president has the legal basis to veto such a law, such a law if it crosses his desk. I don't know, but that's what I would ask him to do. I would say, look, you can't do this. This is going to result in economic downturn. You know.
Now, should it pass, you know, both chambers of the House, and should the president sign it, if that were to happen, what would you like to say to the business community, to employers that are going to have to navigate this new dynamic and change the pay structure within their organizations?
I don't know what to say to these people. It's like, kapit na lang, di ba? Kapit lang. But what can you do? You know, these lawmakers are undermining your business, you know?
It's a tough situation.
It's literally vote buying.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Abba, for sharing your thoughts on this with us. We're taking a short break. Business 360 will be right back. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is taking a viral moment in stride after a TikTok clip of student athletes making faces behind him went popular online. In his latest vlog, Marcos laughed off the incident during his Palarong Pambansa speech in Ilocos Norte, saying that the kids were just probably following the latest trends on TikTok. The playful clip spread quickly across social media, further boosting visibility for the National School Sports event. Marcos even asked his son, Congressman Sandro Marcos, to track down the students for a meetup and gave a nod to the youth for their spontaneity and energy.
Kung Sandro, baka pwede natin mahanap itong mga batang ito para makilala naman natin. Shout out naman dyan sa mga kabataan.
Calls are mounting to immediately start the impeachment trial against Vice President Sara Duterte, with pressure building ahead of the next Congress opening on July 4th. Former Bayan Muna Representative Nery Colmenares says he doesn't buy claims that the Senate lacks time, insisting that the trial can be completed before the next session begins.
Nasabi ko na sa mga senador nung Thursday pa, bigyan nyo na ng summons si Sara Duterte as early as a few days ago para may 10 days siya to respond na by June 16, pwede na kayo magsimula ng trial. So, yeah, June 16 up to June 30, kayang tapusin ng Senadong impeachment.
Colmenares argues the Senate could zero in on what he calls the strongest case, Vice President Duterte's 612 million pesos in confidential funds, and says that alone could be prosecuted in 3 days. He's among those who filed the impeachment complaint last December. The former congressman calls any motion to dismiss the case absurd and unconstitutional, saying that the Senate doesn't have that discretion. Only the impeachment court, he insists, can acquit or convict after a full trial. Still on this topic, the deans of 5 Ateneo law schools are urging the Senate to immediately begin the impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte, calling it a matter of constitutional duty. In a joint statement, deans from the Ateneo system said the Senate must uphold the Constitution and hold public officials accountable. They warned against using technicalities or political maneuvering to block the trial, stressing that public office is a public trust, and that trust is now at stake. Other universities that have joined the call include Adamson, De La Salle, UST, and several members of the UP Law faculty, adding fuel to growing pressure from academics for the Senate to act. As legal and political pressure builds at home, tensions continue to simmer in Philippine waters. A Chinese vessel ran aground near Pag-asa Island in the West Philippine Sea over the weekend amid rough weather conditions. According to a village official on the island, a Chinese fishing vessel has since been removed, but floating devices from the ship were left behind. The Philippine Coast Guard has been deployed to verify the incident, while the armed forces have been placed on alert. Despite heightened tensions in the West Philippine Sea, diplomatic engagement between Manila and Beijing continues. President Bongbong Marcos led the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Philippine-China bilateral relations. The event comes amid ongoing maritime disputes between the two nations. Over the weekend, Jones Bridge, the gateway to the world's oldest Chinatown, was illuminated to mark that milestone. Chinese Ambassador Juan Zilian called it a symbol of the Philippines' long-standing hospitality toward Chinese migrants.
Chinese Filipinos have made tremendous contributions to the national liberation and independence and the Philippines' economic development and cultural richness. They are true stakeholders and rightful protagonists in this multi-society, and whose participation and contribution should be well valued and cherished.
President Marcos, meanwhile, hopes that the project will help revive Ongpin and Escolta, turning them into cultural and economic hubs.
So, I encourage everyone, especially the younger people, to visit Binondo, come back to Ongpin, Escolta, Carvajal, the streets that have yet to be discovered and celebrated. I am also glad to share that tonight's event has a deeper meaning. This project commemorates 50 years of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the People's Republic of China.
We're taking a quick breather. Business 360 will be right back. Welcome back. In Los Angeles, California, National Guard troops clash with protesters amid growing unrest over immigration raids. Trump ordered the deployment to disperse demonstrations that have gripped the area for 3 straight days. National Guard troops, backed by Department of Homeland Security personnel, encountered protesters outside a federal building in downtown Los Angeles. The U.S. Northern Command confirms 2,000 troops have been deployed, with some already on the ground. As the situation on the ground remains tense, and now the White House is weighing in, U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to crack down on protesters who spit on police and National Guard troops, escalating tensions in Los Angeles. Trump earlier described the demonstrations as riots and warned of further action if violence continues. Asked if he expects the protests to spread to other cities, Trump said his administration is closely monitoring the developments.
Do you foresee those protests spreading to other cities, Chicago, New York, for example, in the next few days?
Yes, we're going to be watching it very closely. And when they spit at people, you know, they spit. That's their new thing. They spit, and worse, you know what they throw at them, right? And when that happens, I have a little statement. They say, they spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military.
Authorities have arrested several protesters so far. The Los Angeles police declared a rally near City Hall an unlawful assembly after some demonstrators allegedly threw concrete, bottles, and other objects at the officers. With protests escalating in Los Angeles, the Philippine consulate is now urging Filipinos in the area to take extra precautions. In an advisory, the consulate strongly encourages Filipinos to exercise caution and vigilance amid the ongoing immigration-related demonstrations. They are being advised to avoid large crowd buildups that may escalate into disturbances. The consulate has also posted its emergency hotline for Filipinos who may need immediate assistance. As tensions over immigration and human rights play out in Los Angeles, another flashpoint is drawing global attention halfway across the world. Climate activist Greta Thunberg, now aboard the ship headed for Gaza, says her presence isn't the story, calling instead for focus on what she describes as Israel's siege and oppression. The Medellin, part of the Freedom Flotilla coalition, is carrying symbolic aid to Palestinians while sailing under high security. Thunberg urged the world to keep your eyes on Gaza.
The story here is not that we are sailing to Gaza. The story is here that Israel is having a siege on Gaza and that Israel has been oppressing people for decades and decades and are committing ethnic cleansing, genocide, ecocide, and all kinds of war crimes. That is the story here. So keep your eyes on Gaza, but also keep your eyes on deck here, because visibility means safety.
Meanwhile, Israel has ended an 11-week blockade, allowing some UN operations to resume. But a new aid program backed by the U.S. and Israel has been rejected by major aid groups for lacking neutrality. Tensions flared again after at least 27 Palestinians were killed near a flood distribution site, with Israel denying civilians were targeted. The war, which began after a Hamas attack that killed 1,200 Israelis, has since claimed over 54,000 Palestinian lives, leaving most of Gaza in ruins. French President Emmanuel Macron and First Lady Brigitte Macron welcomed dozens of heads of state and global leaders to Nice on Sunday for the opening dinner of this week's UN Ocean Conference. The summit aims to rally support for a landmark treaty on protecting ocean biodiversity, which still lacks enough ratifications to take effect. Experts warn that marine biodiversity is under mounting threat, facing pressure from pollution, overfishing, and climate change. The treaty's adoption is being closely watched by coastal nations, shipping giants, and blue economy stakeholders around the world, including here in the Philippines. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel, and have a good week ahead.